So, it was about a year ago when The Last of Us Season 2 came out, and in spite of my thoughts about Season 1, I found that Season 2 was an incredible disappointment. But full disclosure, initially I wasn't intending on making a video on Season 2 when it first came out because, well, if I wanted to deal with the baggage that comes with talking about The Last of Us, I could just save time and dive headfirst into a septic tank full of raw sewage. It's something a lot of people just can't be normal about, and so that sucks a lot of the potential fun of analyzing it. With that said, my decision to not cover Season 2 when it came out was then flipped on its head because I actually watched Season 2. Holy crap. It was during episode 4 when I realized, wait, this actually sucks. All for reasons that are mostly completely independent of the work it's actually adapting. So I decided I was going to cover it at the 11th hour and got to work. My friend Jay's reviews had the same thing happen to him, and we had a gentleman's agreement to release our videos on the same day because a lot of what we each mutually had to say were based on conversations that we had had. But because my initial coverage came so soon after the season ended, my opinions hadn't really sunk in yet, and now we're about a year later, and I've come to the realization that not only do I think The Last of Us Season 2 is still bad, it's actually significantly worse than I had initially thought because there are so many things wrong with The Last of Us Season 2 that only become apparent once you take time to really think about it, and talk shop about it with other people. It was to the point I felt I had to make a follow-up. It fails as both an adaptation of the story it's attempting to tell, and as a story in its own right. In fact, it's such a fascinatingly awful season of television, it's kind of hard to know where to start. Well, I guess the best place to start would be thus. I'm kind of going into this with the expectation that everybody already broadly understands what the season is about. But to summarize for those who don't, The Last of Us Season 2 is attempting to adapt the first half of the second game into a television format. The game's story is broadly about a revenge quest because after Joel's decision to kill the Fireflies and save Ellie at the end of the first game, he's now having to deal with the ghost of his past. A team of former Fireflies track him down to Jackson, Wyoming, and brutally beat him to death. After which Joel's brother Tommy goes to Seattle to hunt them down, and Ellie and her new girlfriend Dena are tasked with bringing Tommy back home safely. But they're actually going there to hunt down the culprits themselves. To be clear, this is the story in the game. The story of the show changes some of these details. In particular, Ellie and Dena go on their own accord while Tommy is the one who has to track them down while having his own ulterior motives. And where it begins to differ from the game is where all the problems begin, to the point where even those who love the game tend to hate this season. Granted, it still received critical acclaim and even won Best Adaptation at the Game Awards, if you ever needed another reason not to take that show seriously. No, really, this won while things like Twisted Metal Season 2 wasn't even nominated. Twisted Metal 2 being one of the schlockiest and most fun seasons of television I've seen in a while. Hell, I haven't even seen the movie because I still don't understand the appeal of the series, but I guarantee even the third Sonic movie deserved the award more than this stinking failure. But that also wasn't nominated. So where does this failure begin? To me, everything that's wrong with this season can be triangulated back to the lead writer for most of the season, that being Craig Mazin. Now, if you watched my video on Twisted Metal Season 2, you might have been confused why, in comparing the two seasons of these respective shows, I took several shots at Craig Mazin and not Neil Druckmann. Well, that's because Craig Mazin was the sole writer on a vast majority of this season. Neil Druckmann only co-wrote 2 episodes. See, that's the funny thing about the response to this season for me. The amount of people who were talking about how Neil Druckmann wrote a terrible season of television without verifying. You see, I'm a big believer in giving people shit if they do something to deserve it, but I'm also a big believer in knowing what I'm talking about before doing so. I'm not even a particular fan of the guy, but it's wearying to see people go after someone they don't like at any opportunity, no matter how invalid. Because the dude has said and done enough to warrant criticism that you don't need to make shit up. And I don't think he's responsible for this. At least, for the most part. And for the record, it's not glazing to point out that you have your guns pointed in the wrong direction. In fact, I'm gonna blow your mind and say I think Neil Druckmann dislikes this season as much as the rest of us. How can I tell? Well, you can tell this if you listen to the post-episode commentary. If you listen to these podcasts, you can listen to Craig Mazin justifying his own creative decisions while Neil is basically sitting there talking about the equivalent event in the game and why he did it the way he did in the game, which is usually very different. It says to me that Craig was steering the ship like crazy and everyone else was either too polite or too afraid to call anything into question. Think about this. This series was a dream come true for a lot of people working at Naughty Dog. and now everyone associated with Naughty Dog isn't even returning for Season 3. The official reason is that they're focusing their efforts on Intergalactic, but I don't know. All this says to me that all the flaws with the season can be pointed directly at Craig. I could be wrong, and I can't speak to anything in this regard because I wasn't in the room, but whether you like the game this is adapting or not, bowing out at a low point seems awfully convenient. But then again, Craig was the primary writer for Season 1 as well. So either way, what changed? Well, quite frankly, I think what changed in Season 2 was the inherent synopsis. You see, when you have a writer who's a father of a daughter like Craig writing a story about a father of a daughter, or, surrogates, you know what I mean, and adapting it to television, the story is going to be at least somewhat authentic. I remember hearing them discussing a particular philosophy surrounding the characterization of Ellie and Joel's relationship in Season 1, and describing it by a particular point in a teenager's life they refer to as "F you, tuck me in." The point in which you have a teenager that's rebellious but still young enough to be emotionally dependent on you. I feel like that led to some genuine authenticity in the relationship of Season 1, but I think there's a combination here of insisting on riding with that philosophy in mind despite the character having aged out of that, while also having a writer who's not really able to put himself into the mind of the character. Craig Mazin is not a queer teenager, at least as far as I'm aware. So having him be the lead and sole writer of a show that stars a queer teenager was probably going to lead to some inherent inauthenticities. But even then, even if there are some inauthenticities, you can still pull that back by making the character drama and interpersonal conflicts well written, relatable, and make sense. Unfortunately, that's not the case here, because Craig has some, shall we say, unique interpretations of who Ellie is. And when you have both these issues, both the lack of good character drama and the fact that there's some inauthenticity in the writing, it's with both those issues in mind that I say with certainty that Ellie in The Last of Us Season 2 is insufferable. Like, she's so inherently unlikable. She's an idiot. She's petulant. She's impulsive. She's insubordinate. And she is completely all over the place emotionally. First of all, she's an idiot, and not in an endearing, goofy way, in a way that screams, I don't believe you could grab your ass with both hands, much less survive an apocalypse. Ignoring the fact that she was characterized as being among the top of her class in Season 1 before she got bit, was also able to survive on her own in the middle of winter while taking care of someone who is gravely injured, and outwit David. Like, I wish I could go over all the examples of her being a complete and total moron, but the biggest example of this would probably be when she decides to go after the people who killed Joel. She goes without a plan or even the concept of a plan. She grabs some guns and thinks that's enough. She has to be talked down by Dena, who then gives her a talking to about needing a plan.
Well, better not land weird on an ankle or get a fever on your well-charted path northwest.
And there are tons of little instances of this throughout the season, such as when they're in an abandoned part of Seattle and Ellie slams a tank lid extremely loudly.
Wonder what that was about.
Which would have potentially alerted anyone nearby if there was anybody nearby. It's the luck of fools that they weren't immediately surrounded. And the funny thing is, Dena as well as Jesse openly treat Ellie like an idiot multiple times, condescending to her about her ability to survive alone. And nothing they say is wrong. Like that moment where Dena outright tells Ellie that she wouldn't be able to understand how to triangulate, so not to worry about it.
Can I help? No. Why? Because I'm stupid? That's not the word I would use.
Folks, where's the lie?
She acts like a total moron, and people as idiotic as she's written should not be as impulsive as she is. Literally, from the first episode, the town already views her as a liability because of her propensity of disobeying orders and going maverick. And guess what? They're not proven wrong. In the first episode, she randomly decides to shout at the top of her lungs the one thing she isn't supposed to tell anyone.
I got bit, everybody!
Hey.
I got bit!
Hey!
Which, by the way, would have alerted any unseen nearby infected if there were any. Once again, the luck of fools. And also in the very first episode, she was being kept off patrol for her own good because Joel thought she wasn't being reasonable, but she takes it as an affront thinking he's trying to control her. That may have been how they intended it, but after she was eventually able to force her way on, she ends up on patrol with Dena, her ex-girlfriend Kat, and some other people, and guess what? She proves exactly what Joel was afraid of when she deliberately disobeys orders and goes into an abandoned supermarket, almost getting herself killed in the process. She even gets herself bit. She would have been screwed if she wasn't the one person who was immune. So she acts like a little kid throwing a tantrum, doesn't understand why she's being left off patrol, and when she does get let on, she does exactly what they were afraid of. How am I supposed to sympathize with this character when everything bad that happens to her is entirely her own fault? Look, I get it. Ellie has a death wish because at this point, she's fully aware that Joel had lied to her. To her, he took away her life meaning and therefore she's dealing with severe survivor's guilt. But there's a way to bring that across without making her horrible, because when you have a main character acting like this right from the start, I'm wondering why these people are having to put up with this at all. And I'm sure they are too. It does not make me sympathize with the character. It does not make her endearing. The one time she should be impulsive is when she decides to go after the Seattle crew, because at that point she's blinded by fury. But I don't know what they were thinking showing her to have these tendencies even before everything goes down. It should be obvious that she should be more reasonable and more level-headed before everything goes down, because that shows that juxtaposition. It shows a fall from grace. She somehow acts less mature in this season than she was previously, and she's supposed to be an adult at this point. Sure, be defensive, be grumpy, be depressed, be mad at the fact that you feel like your life means nothing now because you feel like your purpose was taken away from you. But impulsivity, insubordination, and idiocy just makes you question why I should care, because it makes the character fundamentally unlikable. One of the least likable protagonists I've seen, especially of those who are intending to be likable. Plus, her motivations and emotional state are all over the place. So Craig has gone on record since episode 1 of season 1 that he believes Ellie enjoys violence, and that's not necessarily a bad thing in a story like this. I don't think it's necessarily a correct interpretation, but it's not a bad idea, quite the opposite. If you have somebody with a lot of anger in their heart, putting them on a revenge quest that ultimately alienates them from everyone they know can lead to some great interpersonal drama. That is, if they weren't already alienating themselves, but we've gone over that. Except they can't decide if she's actually committed to the anger or not. Throughout this season, she manages to kill a grand total of 3 people who were directly responsible for the death of Joel. She intended to kill one of them, and even then, she implies that she regrets it. She beats Nora to death in one of the few scenes in the season where it feels like the show has a pulse. Then, in the most on-the-nose manner possible, questions whether or not Nora deserved it.
Yeah, well, maybe she got what she deserved.
Maybe she didn't.
No, fuck off. You are on a revenge quest against the people who killed your surrogate dad, and you're supposed to be an inherently angry person. There is no second guessing this, especially after only killing one of them. Sure, you should feel scared of who you're becoming. You should maybe even feel a bit traumatized, but you shouldn't regret this after one kill. And then hilariously, she eventually kills Owen and Mel, but didn't intend to kill them. She kills Owen in self-defense after he lunges for a gun, which accidentally clips Mel. I remember liking this scene initially because it meant that Mel was a truly innocent bystander who died just by association, which is sort of her role in the story, being the one who's most apprehensive about everything.
I'll let her live. Wait, Abby. Shut up!
But in hindsight, once again, you're on a revenge quest. You should feel kill crazy. Not immediately remorseful before even knowing Mel is pregnant. Mel being pregnant was supposed to be the light switch moment that made her realize she went too far. But when she doesn't even go that far to begin with, who cares? According to someone, I forget who, they filmed a scene where there was a bit more emotional weight to it, as if it was more of a struggle between the two parties, but they picked this scene because they thought it would be unrealistic for Ellie to go toe-to-toe with Owen. Yeah, I agree with that. He's like twice her size, but surely there was a middle ground between having her overpowering Owen and having this fluke of a double kill. What if, say, she shoots Owen after he lunges for a gun, then Mel and Ellie get into it? They look like they're on a relatively equal playing field. And I'm sure after seeing her boyfriend die, Mel would probably be launched straight into an adrenaline-fueled fight-or-flight mode. But no, that could never work. I'm being sarcastic, by the way. Then there's the whole thing about Dena being pregnant, and instead of being angry at the mission possibly being compromised, Ellie is ecstatic.
I'm gonna be a dad.
I know a lot of people make fun of the "I'm gonna be a dad" line. I don't hate that line in premise. It's a dumb, goofy line you might say to your significant other. It's not that deep. But what is a problem is that Ellie should be angry at the fact that Dena is now a liability because that puts the entire revenge quest in jeopardy when she should be the one thinking about that above all else. In fact, Ellie is the one to suggest they should go back to Jackson, and Dena is the one to say they shouldn't.
Do you want to go back? I'll take you back. You don't need to do this with me.
This is so bass-ackwards, I can't even. A dumb, goofy line that's a bit tonally iffy and feels more like a rom-com line, fine, whatever. But everything else is just so confused. Not confusing, confused. As in they don't know what they're doing. And then there was that whole thing about how she was going to risk her life jumping into a fight between a Seraphite and a bunch of WLF soldiers because she felt compelled to save who she saw as an innocent bystander. First of all, she doesn't know anything about what's going on right now. For all she knows, this guy could be the second coming of David. Second of all, it has nothing to do with anything you're actually in the city to do. You should not give a damn. Whatever's going on between these two factions does not concern you, and you should know that. You're putting everything in jeopardy just to save one person you don't know. Once again, having to be talked down by a significantly more intelligent person. I get it, you want to make your protagonist seem sympathetic. But you can make them seem sympathetic and not be a complete moron. Especially because being sympathetic shouldn't necessarily be the goal right now. Especially if it means going up against a bunch of soldiers who are way better equipped than you and would kill you in an instant. Between all these negative attributes and inconsistent elements, how did nobody stand up in the writer's room and say, "This makes no sense"? Was there even a writer's room? It's so irritating, and I think the final nail comes in the form of the line, "F*** the community."
It wasn't in the best interest of the community.
Fuck the community!
That's the summation of her entire character. From moment one, she never cared about anybody else but herself. She jeopardizes the safety of others, she's selfish, she's impulsive, she's insubordinate, and is a complete liability to the point where I wouldn't be surprised if she gets kicked out of Jackson when she finally returns. Because everything about the character in this season makes me think she deserves nothing but expulsion. She obviously doesn't care about the community because she operates within the community on sufferance at best.
Because everything you do for you.
Thank you!
What really sucks is that Ellie is the principal main character. She's on screen for 95% of the story, and when you have a character this unlikable, it completely torpedoes any chance of the show being good. It's almost morbid in a sense because I feel like Season 1 was good enough that it was sort of a career-making performance for Bella Ramsey, but this might actually be a career-ruining performance for her, and I don't blame Bella Ramsey. I just think the script completely undermines anything good about what you could say about her performance. Which is sad because you can tell she's trying to make a lot of this work. She is acting her ass off in some of these scenes. And in the rare instances where the scene is actually good, you do get glimpses of brilliance.
You cost us time. You let them get away.
But there's only so much you can do when the character is so poorly written. The funny thing is, this doesn't actually apply to the side characters a lot of the time. I think Dena and Jesse are both really good. Said it last time, I'll say it again. I feel like Isabella Merced should be careful not to herniate her entire spine carrying this show, because she is the only redeeming factor in most of the scenes she's in.
But since everyone's past is fucked, and we've all heard everyone's fucked stories, how do you think this one goes?
She's a very talented actress and somehow makes a lot of what she's given actually work. I mean, it helps that she's a consistent character throughout. In fact, if I were less kind, I might even go as far as to say I think this season was more of a Dena story than it was an Ellie story. She's the one toughing out the adventure despite her severe handicap of being pregnant. She's the one getting things done while Ellie is off being stupid. She's the one who had more character building moments with Joel. Like, one of my favorite scenes in the early season was a quiet moment between Dena and Joel where he's trying to explain the basics of circuit breakers.
Before you mess with circuits, you gotta check if the wires are live, so how do you do that?
I lick them?
Bruh.
It's one of those cases where you get the sense that Craig Mazin understands how the dynamic works between a father figure and a daughter figure. Hell, I'll say this much, Pedro Pascal only shows up for a couple of episodes, but he is terrific all the way through. I know some people are sick of Pedro Pascal on account of him being a bit overexposed these days, but come on. The dude's in his 50s and finally got the recognition he deserves. I support him in getting that bag before he retires. Another one of my favorite scenes from episode 1 is when Joel is fretting over the town's rebuilding efforts.
Yeah, cock. It's high up on my list.
Me too, Joel. Me too. Particularly seeing him interact with his young nephew because that is adorable, if slightly on the nose as far as foreshadowing is concerned. But as far as Dena feeling more like the protagonist than Ellie, she's also the one present while Abby's crew is killing Joel, and is therefore the reason why they know to go to Seattle. She's even partially responsible for Joel's death because after Joel saved Abby, Dena was the one who was patrolling with him and shouted out his name, inadvertently revealing who he was. Seriously, if you were to take somebody who hasn't watched Season 1 and tell them to watch Season 2 with the exception of Episode 6, they would probably be wondering why the main character spends so much time off screen in favor of her annoying sidekick, because Dena is completely, by accident, way more protagonist-coded than the actual protagonist. I'm glad Isabella Merced is getting more opportunities because she, more than anyone, doesn't deserve to have her career harmed by this season. I mean, nobody deserved it, but her especially. Honestly, I feel like the relationship between Dena and Ellie might have been cute if the story were better. Yeah, this is another thing I've gone back on. Their whole relationship has rom-com energy when that feels completely disconnected from the actual tone of the show. Not that it really matters, because that whole thing about how the show ends up feeling like a casual stroll through the tulips takes up a pretty significant part of the season. Like, I came here for a revenge quest in a post-apocalypse, and what I instead got was a Seattle vacation, which includes such riveting scenes as sitting down and playing the entirety of Take On Me. Yes, I like that part of The Last of Us where Ellie sits down and plays guitar for a really long time. Not really, actually. This was like a 40-minute episode, which means they dedicated 10% of the runtime to this, as opposed to the game where that scene was entirely optional. This entire situation has no tension. It feels like an entirely different show from what it should be. And it's part of why my biggest issue with the season is what it is, but we'll cover that in a second. Either way, this whole season should be an opportunity to test their relationship, not reinforce it. Because they should be treating this like a dire, dangerous situation, not like the vacation it's portrayed as. Jesse is also pretty good here, being the put-upon big brother figure to Ellie, which incidentally she badly needs. He tries to keep her in line, he tries to tell her everything she needs to hear, and plays that role pretty well. But even his portrayal is kind of ruined because of the show's propensity to have incredibly on-the-nose dialogue. I already briefly touched on this, but I swear this season has a policy of leaving no one behind, because they speak so plainly to the audience. I think the most egregious example of this would be,
I'm gonna be a father, which means I can't die.
Aside from the fact he's scolding Ellie for forcing him into the situation against his will because she and Dena decided to run off, which by the way she deserved a scolding for, the way he says it is so incredibly obvious. At this point, they should just have a countdown clock above his head counting down to the moment he dies, because they basically spelled it out. There are so many key scenes in this season that were potentially good but were ruined by the dialogue choices, spelling out things that could have easily been inferred by the audience, saying things in the most obvious way possible. It's hard to get invested in the show when the show itself is treating me like I'm as big of an idiot as Ellie. It's like the writer had no patience for anybody making any sort of interpretation other than the exact literal one they were intending. But the real killer about this show is the pacing. In hindsight, this is one of the most boring f***ing seasons of television I've ever seen in my life. It's so unbelievably slow-paced. It takes forever for anything to happen, and when it does, it's usually disappointing. This is mostly because they cut out a bunch of the stuff that I guess they maybe didn't think was necessary for the pacing of the show. In particular, they cut out something like half of the hunting party from Abby's crew. In this case, you only have Abby, Mel, Owen, Nora, and Manny. The other three were cut. Sure, the three that were cut were fodder who I couldn't even remember the names of off the top of my head, but it got things going at a quick pace. Day one, you find, I think his name was Nick, and slit him up. By consolidating the members to the necessary people, it means you don't get any consequential action scenes until more than halfway through the season. So you get 3 really boring episodes and 1 episode that was exciting before anything actually happens. Plus, I know that since there's no gameplay, you don't need to justify action happening all the time, but I would like some action at all. Outside of the frankly spectacular scene in episode 2 when the infected invade the town, there's like 4 action scenes in the entire season, at least half of which are too short. But the casual tone and lack of urgency is partially caused by the lack of danger. Sure, the first season didn't have that much action either, but the situations they found themselves in at least felt dangerous. And they also had the character scenes to fall back on. Without compelling drama, it only shines a spotlight on the lack of action, because I find myself bored. Aside from that, it's a season filled with so much irrelevant nothing. I remember having all the benefit of the doubt in the world going into the first episode, and as such, it felt a bit underwhelming, but I was also understanding because episode 1 was setting up a major event. Episode 2 actually felt pretty thrilling because it was basically a shot-for-shot remake of the most important parts of the game with some extra bits thrown in. It wasn't perfect, but we'll get to that later. I still feel like you could have maybe combined episode 1 and 2, mostly by cutting out some of the more superfluous elements. Like that entire scene in the supermarket served no real purpose other than to show that there are now more intelligent zombies that are called stalkers. Did that really need a 15-minute segment? You could have just had the group encounter some intelligent zombies out in the wild without having Ellie be a total idiot. So if you just had them encounter the zombies and fight them, that would have cut the scene down to like 5 minutes. Here's the funny part. If you make Ellie act competently, then it makes Joel seem unreasonable for not wanting her to go on patrol. And it's questionable if you even need to show the stalkers, considering they only come up once more in the entire season. Even the town invasion in episode 2 feels a bit like visual popcorn more than anything, but you know, don't look a gift horse in the mouth and all that. As much as it only tangentially serves the rest of the season, at least it was easily the best action scene in the entire show. I feel like if you were to combine the necessary elements of episodes 1 and 2, you'd end up with a pretty long episode. But then again, episode 1 in season 1 was 80 minutes long. I don't see why we couldn't just do that again, because the way they end this episode feels like the way they were originally supposed to end season 1, episode 1, i.e. in a very unsatisfying way. This way, you can gradually build to the big twist over the course of 80 minutes. I think that would work just fine. But then we get to episode 3, and the fallout of this event is dramatic, but it's so unbelievably boring. So after getting out of the hospital, Ellie decides to plead her case as to why they should send a battalion of people to Seattle to hunt down these killers. We have a prelude to her doing so, and we have to sit through the entire extended town meeting, all to watch her get denied. Then we see how she decides to go anyway. They visit Joel's grave, they have a camping trip, all to see them arrive at the edge of Seattle. That was an entire episode. And I'm telling you, I can't possibly do justice to how boring this is. Nothing happens. Episode 4 was what made me realize this season was going nowhere, but episode 3 is probably the worst episode of the entire season. The most that happens is that Seth decides to speak up on Ellie's behalf. You know, that guy who called her a slur in front of the entire city? He even helps her out with getting supplies when they sneak out. What are they trying to say here? Are they really trying to make a complete nothing character like Seth have depth? Or what? Are they trying to make the audience see that this whole thing was a bad idea by showing a character we're conditioned to not like, show support? What confusing priorities? Then there are a number of other things that could have been cut. As blasphemous as it may be to say, given how much I love Catherine O'Hara, God rest her soul, that scene with her speaking very plainly about how similar Joel and Ellie are, that serves no real purpose other than treating the audience like idiots once again.
No, I think they were walking side by side from the very start.
The grief counseling can be cut, as with everything else before and during the town meeting. The camping trip can be cut. I'm not kidding when I say they could have cut 80% of this episode and nothing would have changed. You could have cut to 3 months later when Ellie is out of the hospital and just cut past the town meeting in a sentence by saying the council already rejected our request for a hunting party, so what are we gonna do? Then episode 4 was even more of nothing, to the point where this is the episode where the show completely lost me. I have a hard time even remembering what happened. It's supposed to be the episode where the action finally kicks in, but the action kicks in for like 2 minutes, and it involves a bunch of characters we don't know nor care about. This is the episode where they're walking around Seattle, they try and find somewhere to set up shop, they visit the TV station, they go underground, and the entire point of this episode is for both Ellie and Dena's secrets from each other to be revealed. So congratulations guys, you wasted an entire episode's runtime for an emotionally charged ending that doesn't even convey the correct emotions. You see, the question you should be asking yourself when it comes to episodic TV shows like this is, what is the point of this episode and how does it further the story? Episode 3 is the fallout of episode 2, and episode 4 is about secrets being revealed. You don't need entire episodes to do that. That's why I've always said you could easily combine 3 and 4. It doesn't even need to be double length, you just cut all the fat and it would probably still end up being less than an hour. Then there's this weird ubiquitous Isaac subplot. This isn't relevant to Ellie's story. It's relevant to Abby's story, but I feel like the only reason it's being shown here is to establish the war between the two factions and to theoretically set up something for season 3. The problem is, I don't care. because this has nothing to do with what I'm hypothetically interested in. Sure, I laughed at Josh Peck getting blown up, but that's because I'm amused by the idea of the whole thing being an elaborate prank by Megan. Yes, I know I made that joke last time, but I still find it funny. At this moment in time, showing Isaac feels like a completely different show. Like, I think it would actually be cooler as a fresh viewer to see all these minor skirmishes and all these disemboweled hanging corpses and wonder what's going on, instead of shoehorning something that feels completely irrelevant. Like, there's a single moment where there's theoretically a bit of crossover when in episode 7, Ellie is going to the dock to try and find a boat to get to the aquarium where Mel and Owen are. But it feels so hilarious because it's like a big dramatic reveal of a person Ellie's never met before. You could cut all these scenes and nothing would change to Ellie's story. The show would only improve in the pacing department if you did this. The second half of episode 5 is actually thrilling because, once again, it's basically a shot-for-shot recreation of something that already existed, while the first half bores me to tears. The one interesting part is Isabella Merced once again giving a tour de force performance in recounting Dena's backstory.
If he had gotten away, I promise you, I would have hunted him down forever.
But outside of that moment, I struggle to remember anything from the rest of the first half of this episode. They probably could have cut that down quite a bit. After that, I've said it before and I'll say it again. As good as episode 6 is in a vacuum, it takes away the entire purpose of all these scenes by putting them one after another. They're supposed to punctuate every major story beat to keep you wondering where Joel and Ellie's relationship was by the time he died. You're not supposed to know the true answer until the very end, at which point it becomes a bit of dramatic irony, knowing that this was the last time that Joel and Ellie ever speak. And this is contrasted with the tragic end of the whole story, kind of ending both stories at the same time. It's not a stylistic mistake, and by presenting it the way they do, it removes the entire purpose of these flashbacks. Every bit of information is supposed to be drip-fed by design, but even here, they show that Ellie knows what Joel did by episode 5. Yeah, way to give us our dessert before we've had dinner. In all honesty, you could easily truncate episode 6 and divvy it around a bit. Like immediately after the cold open of episode 1 that replays the ending of the previous season. You should then show everything up to the end of the birthday scene before flash forwarding. Then you have the cold open of basically every episode being another one of these flashbacks, because sprinkling these scenes piecemeal throughout the story was how they were originally intended. So at every story interval, you get a recontextualization of their relationship. And you may ask, well, what about the flashback scenes that they showed us with Isaac's backstory? One of those was a cold open for the episode. Well, I'd like them to take that scene and shove it somewhere. Where, you may ask? I'll leave you in suspense. And you know, it's funny, even if episode 6 is good in theory, even then they completely butcher it by mismatching and misunderstanding certain things. So first of all, there's that scene where Ellie figures out that Joel was lying. They find Eugene, Gail's husband and resident weed dealer of the town. He's been bit, and Ellie insists they take him back to town while he's still human so he can say goodbye to Gail. Joel promises he's gonna do that before sending her off and capping Eugene in the head. You see, it was deliberate that he said "I promise" in the exact way he said it at the end of season 1. It's supposed to be the deliberate parallel that shows Ellie, once and for all, that his promises mean nothing, and that in turn shows her that what he said and how he said it when he lied to her this time was identical to what he did that time. But she doesn't confront him about it here. It would have been so easy. In fact, almost brain-dead easy to have her confront him and say exactly what I just said. The way you just lied to me was exactly what you said on the hill. So tell me the truth once and for all, or I'm leaving. Instead, they have her confront him about the lie on the porch, basically meaning that she says that if he doesn't tell her the truth, then she's leaving, right before saying that she wants to try and forgive him. These are two completely emotionally charged sentiments that do not go one after another. I know you're lying and I want to try and forgive you go so much better when the person who's angry has time to stew. Putting them back to back makes no emotional sense and feels like putting two contrasting emotions jarringly close to each other. And speaking of jarring emotions,
Because I love you.
I'm sorry, anybody who wants to talk about what is and is not out of character for Joel, this is out of character. Dude is an emotionally repressed man who grew up with an abusive father, lost his daughter, spent 20 years in an apocalypse, and experienced untold suffering and hardship. His love language is being as indirect as possible, as proven by that one scene where he sort of opens up to Ellie in the first season.
It wasn't time that did it.
To hear him say the words "I love you" is completely ridiculous. It's the cherry on top of how they butchered this portion of the season, even if it is a good episode if you don't think about it too hard. It speaks once again to this idea that a certain writer sees us as a bunch of idiots who can't read between the lines. And honestly, I feel like that whole thing where they showed Joel's backstory from his father and then mirrored his father when saying that hopefully one day when you have your own, you'll do better than me. I think that is enough. You don't need to have him say the big 3 words. And I just can't get over the fact that they showed us the ending of the story in the middle. Like, apparently the reason why they showed the ending of the story in the middle is because Craig Mazin was not convinced that people would stick around long enough to see how Joel and Ellie's story ends if they have to wait a couple of years. Congratulations, you've glanced off the point but completely missed it. I don't want to necessarily blame Craig or anyone else in the production for this decision. Presumably this was a decision by HBO higher-ups who wanted to stretch out the show as much as possible, but I still blame them for the execution. Even episode 7, the payoff to everything, has so much that could have easily been cut. Like the aforementioned moment where Ellie threatens to go after a group of soldiers to save somebody she doesn't know. Then there's one of the worst scenes in the entire show. In fact, no. There is no one of the about this. It is the worst scene in the show. I am not kidding. I've thought about it, and words fail me to describe just how utterly baffling the scene where Ellie is taking the boat to the aquarium and then is subjected to a giant wave that then knocks her to the Seraphite Island is. It's funny, because I remember when I initially watched this show, I was excited about the idea of her washing up on the Seraphite Island, only to be completely dumbfounded when by some cosmic miracle, she manages to get away because at this exact moment, the WLF siege of the island is taking place. Seriously, this is the most contrived thing in the entire show, and that's saying a lot. I used to think this was a bad moment in the season, and now I think it's downright insulting. They're hanging her by her neck, they're about to kill her the way they've killed so many others, and then they just leave her because something else is happening. They could have slit her open and been done with it, but they decided to let her go? This whole digression lasts 2 minutes, and from the perspective of the Seraphites, doesn't even make any sense. As far as they know, she could be one of the attackers. Apparently during the creator commentary, Craig Mazin said that this was his way of showing that even the universe itself is trying to keep Ellie away from the aquarium. Yeah, that's all well and good, but it's still really stupid. There's an old phrase, the road to hell is paved with good intentions, and this scene had all the potential in the world if they actually did something interesting with it. Instead, they did something as dumb as possible. It is unjustifiable and, quite frankly, indicative of the entire season all around. It attempts to connect the 2 stories that don't need to be connected and are only connected because they decided to split the season the way they did. It adds nothing to the overall story to the point of total meaninglessness. It blows a potentially good idea through bungled execution. It's resolved embarrassingly quick, and is resolved in the most contrived way possible because they had her dead to rights. That is the entire season in a nutshell. I'm gonna be a dad. Fuck the community. The supermarket scene. The spontaneous, emotionally confused sex scene. The triangulation scene. Camping. Anything to do with Isaac. The town meeting. Everything. Everything in this season falls before this one scene. I don't know what the hell they were thinking. Like, that's what's so baffling about this season is that they cut so much from the story of the game, and yet they had a bunch of pointless filler that didn't do anything for the story. So what you end up with is something that's simultaneously padded out but cut down. Let's be honest, the only reason this season depicts the first half of the game is that they're trying to stretch the story out in hopes of having a third game to adapt by the time they're done with Season 3 or, God forbid, Season 4 if they decide to try and stretch this game into a third season. But thankfully I've heard that with the Warner Brothers sale, there's a good chance that they're gonna finish the story with 3, because they might not be able to secure funding for a 4th season with the way things are going. Good, it didn't need to be split in half to begin with, let alone split into 3. Like I said, combine episodes 1 and 2, combine episodes 3 and 4, cut the Isaac subplot and have the WLF Seraphite War be a background intrigue, sprinkle episode 6 throughout the season, and there you go. The season is told in 5 episodes. Guess what? Then you could have easily told Abby's portion of the story in 5 episodes as well, if you follow this style of structuring. Then episode 11 can be the epilogue. You don't even need 2 episodes to show it. You only need like 10 minutes of showing Ellie where she is, 10 minutes of showing Abby where she is, then the fight in the Rattler's compound followed by the final fight should take no more than a half hour. And guess what? By not splitting these two stories into 2 seasons, you wouldn't have to sacrifice either story at the altar of the other. Like, you wouldn't have to have that intrigue-destroying scene at the beginning of episode 1 showing Abby's crew mulling over exactly what they're gonna do. Because part of the blind hatred you're supposed to have for them is built on the fact you don't know anything about them. It doesn't work as a story if you structure it differently. Sure, in the story as presented, they need the audience to understand exactly what happened before they get to season 3, otherwise they might not stick around. But that's the problem. Cutting the story into 2 forces you to connect the 2 stories artificially by showing you bits and pieces of the other story and rearrange the story of Ellie so that it's finished by the end of the season. But all that does is completely butcher the story because it forces you to remove the intrigue, remove the mystery, and add a bunch of scenes that feel completely disjointed. Even the big scene where they kill Joel is negatively affected by the structure requiring the audience to understand what's going on now instead of later. They decided to give Abby an extended monologue to Joel for the purposes of the audience, not him.
Everyone agrees. Are just fucking wrong.
I mean, yeah, this scene is mostly lifted straight from the game in a good way. I mean, it's not as good because the room they're in is too bright and sterile. It doesn't have that cold, foreboding look the game's version does, but this monologue is what really annoys me. Once again, I know some people are probably gonna give me crap for even suggesting the game did anything right, but in the game, you get the sense that Abby was about to deliver an impassioned speech that she's been preparing for 5 years, only for Joel to say, whatever speech you have prepared, just say it and get it over with, which completely takes the wind out of her sails because I think it shows her that he doesn't give a shit. While she was hoping that he was gonna beg for mercy while she tells him all the reasons she's not gonna give him any. But he basically says in the most badass and defiant way possible, "Congrats, you got me. Let's get this over with." He's not here to beg for his life. He's accepted his fate, and he doesn't care why this is happening. That's awesome. But in the show, he lets her prattle on for about 2 minutes before telling her to shut up.
No, just shut the fuck up and do it already.
Which once again takes away any sort of suspense or intrigue from this scene. I seriously cannot stress enough how this should have never been split into 2 seasons. Or at the very least, it shouldn't have been split into 2 seasons the way they did it. It seems like their options were either to tell the whole story in one go, or restructure the story in a deliberate and intelligent manner so that the story at hand got split in half but still feels complete in its own way. Unfortunately, they structured it in the worst way possible. It only makes sense to us because we know there's a second half to the story that ties everything together. But imagine if you're not already aware of that, how confusing this must be. They opted to only tell you half the story, but tell it in the worst way possible, so you have neither the benefits of showing you half the story, nor do you have the benefits of showing you both stories. And that's the final word. This is some of the worst television writing I've ever seen. And sadly, it's one of those cases where the badness of the season isn't entirely obvious because you can tell a lot of well-placed effort went into a lot of the aspects of this show. The visuals are good, the special effects are good, it's shot competently, the score is as good as you would expect, but none of that matters because the storytelling is so unbelievably bad, to the point where it actually made me second-guess Craig Mazin's entire career. Because badness this rich and pungent is career-defining in my opinion. And it was also disheartening to see stars of the show, including Bella Ramsey, talk about how if you don't like it, don't watch it. Oh, you never say that in online discourse. That is a red rag to a bull to people who don't like you. What you should do is listen to reasonable criticism and try to improve next time. Here's the thing, guys, I'm not perfect. Far from it. Sometimes I snarkily reply to commenters, and sometimes I look back and think, man, I was way too hostile to that person. But I do genuinely try to take good faith criticism on board. You don't insult your audience and then tell them not to watch, because without your audience, you are nothing. I know that. I know I'm nothing without my audience. And who I really feel bad for are the people on the ground level just doing their jobs. Like, I actually met one of the people who worked on the show. When I was out in the wild, somebody had a Last of Us Season 2 mug and I complimented them on it, and they said, oh, I actually worked on the show, and we had a conversation about that. I feel bad for people like that. You think they wanted to work on a bad season of television? But ultimately, I think it can largely be blamed on one person. But you know what? If there's one thing I can say positively about this season, is that it's one of the rare things that sort of unites the two factions. There are still people out there who have a vehement hatred for The Last of Us Part 2 the game. I was once one of those people, then I actually played the game. On the other hand, you have fans who liked the second game, but I would say even if the reasons are different, a vast majority of people on both sides agree that The Last of Us Season 2 was wank. In fact, it was kind of funny. Recently I was talking to a friend of mine who's a huge Last of Us fan, a friend who I affectionately refer to as Diabito. He's a person who's so disconnected from the internet that he was actually dumbfounded at the idea that some people didn't like the second game. I was talking to him recently for the first time since the season came out, and I asked him what he thought. He said, "There were 2 good episodes," and I replied, "That is the correct answer." Even the positive discourse seems a lot less enthusiastic than it did for Season 1, but you know what? I do have a sense that Season 3 might end up actually being better than Season 2. Not that it's much of a challenge, but I do think that Season 3 has potential because even though she only showed up a few times, I thought that Caitlin Dever was really good. And I feel like her story has more potential to be told on a larger scale. But I've been wrong before. I guess it just remains to be seen how they can butcher that story as well. That's all I've got. If you like this video and want to support the channel, you can leave a like, subscribe, hit the notification icon so you're always up to date on what I'm doing, and also comment telling me what you think. Plus, hit the hype button, I guess. I've been the King of Snark Style right here on Tactical Bacon Productions, and I will see you next time. Stay crispy, my friends.